Thank you, Madam Chairman. Before beginning my questions, Madam Secretary, let me remind some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who keep bemoaning the cuts in the CR that we're broke. And the only reason that this Congress is even dealing with a CR is because the last Congress couldn't even pass a budget for the first time in 34 years, at least in the House, and then couldn't pass appropriations bills to keep the government functioning. So that being said, let me begin my first question with Libya. Madam Secretary, it's difficult to look at the initial U.S. response to the unrest in Libya and think of any word other than tepid. Although the administration has suggested that its initial reaction was tempered in order to avoid provoking a hostage situation, such fears did not seem to hinder other nations. The Chinese dispatched a frigate and the British dispatched at least 2 warships and employed C-130s during their evacuation operation. At the same time, our rented ferry was stuck in port because it could not initially make the journey across the Mediterranean. Everything we've learned about the Gaddafi regime over the past decades indicates that its leadership responds to force or the threat of force. For example, back in 2003, when Gaddafi, after looking at the ease with which the U.S. military, at least at first, dispatched the Iraqi army, they feared that he might be next. His response was to agree to renounce all terrorism and hand over to the U.S. his entire WMD program. By sending ships to the Libyan coast, the British and Chinese effectively told Gaddafi that there would be a steep price to intervening in their evacuation. Why did we not do the same? Although we are now repositioning forces off the Libyan coast, our unwillingness to use or to threaten to use force to protect our own citizens has left many around the world pointing to this incident as a sign of the weakness of America's will. What led the administration to believe that threatening force to protect our own citizens would have been provocative?
Well, Congressman, first, let me say that other countries don't have the same history with Libya that we do. And if you look at some of the early statements that were coming out of Gaddafi and his leadership team, they didn't talk about the Chinese. They talked about the Americans. Our embassy was overrun in Libya in 1979. We feel that we did this in a prudent and effective manner, and we did it in a way that did not raise the alarm bells around the region and the world that we were about to invade for oil. If you follow, as we follow, all of the websites that are looking at what's happening in the Middle East, you see a constant drumbeat that the United States is going to invade Libya to take over the oil, and we can't let that happen. Well, we are not going to do that, and we are going to side with the Libyan people and their aspirations. But the last thing in the world we wanted was to start off with military assets when we very effectively got our people out. Yeah, the seas were high. The seas were high for the other evacuators as well. So I just disagree fundamentally with your assumption. I've seen no evidence that anybody thinks less of us because we were smart about how we got our people, not only our embassy people, but American citizens who were working in Libya out safely. And as soon as we did, we pivoted very quickly and led the way at the Security Council, have led the way in pushing beyond rhetoric with the Europeans and the others. It's easy to make a speech. It's harder to actually impose the sanctions, freeze the assets, target the arms, etc. And I think we handled this in a very effective way and without a single problem for any American.
Madam Secretary, let me move on. We have limited time, obviously. On the Iranian nuclear program, I'd like to talk about that next here briefly. During the latest round of negotiations with the Iranian regime in Istanbul, the Iranians were adamant in emphasizing their right to indigenous enrichment. A recent bipartisan letter from numerous senators reflects the overwhelming view of Congress on this question. It's still, however, unclear what the administration's position on this issue is. The letter cited reports suggesting that the administration is open to an indigenous Iranian enrichment capability, albeit under certain conditions. The so-called Einhorn plan, for example, would allow Iran to maintain 4,000 centrifuges. You even went so far as to suggest during an interview with the BBC that Iran has a right to enrichment. Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the source of the Iranian claim, is not clear on this point. What is the administration's position on Iran's claim that they have a right to an enrichment program on their soil? And does the administration believe that the current regime should be allowed to enrich or reprocess domestically?
Well, Congressman, it has been our position that under very strict conditions, Iran would sometime in the future, having responded to the international community's concerns and irreversibly shut down its nuclear weapons program, have such a right under IAEA inspection. I think that is the position of the international community along with the United States.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you. Mr. Carnahan, the ranking member on the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation. And the reason I interrupt is because we've got limited